The roar of jet engines shook the tarmac at Nelly's Air Force Base, rattling loose equipment and sending gusts of dust across the concrete runway. Lieutenant Kara Mitchell, just 17, sat rigid in Seat 11F of the military transport plane. Around her, seasoned F-22 pilots and aircrew moved with calm precision, their faces set in expressions of practiced control. But the moment Kara had stepped on board, a ripple of uncertainty had passed through the cabin. The whispers started almost immediately. "Who is this kid?" one pilot murmured, leaning over the shoulder of the man in front. "I've never seen her in any flight logs." Kara's fingers gripped the armrests so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She was small, almost fragile in appearance, but inside, a storm of focus and adrenaline raged. For years she had been training in secret, her existence as a pilot-class prodigy scrubbed from official records. The military had monitored her progress through clandestine programs and simulators, testing her abilities while keeping the world oblivious. But today, she would step into the real world. Today, she would sit among legends. And the plane's loud hum, the vibration under her seat, and the smell of jet fuel mingling with recycled cabin air only sharpened her senses. The pilot's voice cut through the static of pre-flight chatter. "All personnel, secure yourselves. Prepare for high-altitude insertion. This will not be a standard drill." A few heads turned toward the cockpit. Even seasoned officers felt that twinge of apprehension that comes before a test no one can fully predict. Kara's heart thumped in her chest. She wasn't nervous, not exactly. She felt an odd combination of exhilaration and precise focus. A mental state she'd cultivated through countless simulations and late-night hours poring over flight schematics. From her seat she could see the elite F-22 pilots lined up in their own cabin section, their eyes flicking toward her with barely concealed curiosity. Captain Daniels, one of the most decorated fighter pilots in the Air Force, leaned back in his seat, his brow furrowed. His instincts were screaming that this kid, this small figure with oversized headphones and a calm demeanor, did not belong here. And yet, there was something different about her stance, the way her shoulders were squared even as the plane began to taxi. "Who authorized this?" whispered Lieutenant Harper, shifting in his harness to get a better look at Kara. A few others exchanged glances, uncertain if they were witnessing an operational oversight or something classified. The plane rolled along the runway, the vibration intensifying, and Kara felt it deep in her bones, a primal thrill she couldn't suppress. As the plane gained speed, the intercom crackled again. "Team, brace for takeoff. This is not a simulation. Repeat, this is not a simulation." The words sank into Kara like ice. Her pulse quickened and she closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She remembered her training, every emergency procedure, every evasive maneuver, every calculation she had run 100 times in the simulator. She was ready. Then came the moment of liftoff. The transport jolted violently as the wheels lifted from the runway, and a sudden surge of G-forces pressed Kara back into her seat. The cabin lights flickered, and a gust of cold air swept in from the open rear ramp as the plane ascended. Around her, some pilots gritted their teeth, adjusting for the turbulence, while others stared wide-eyed at the sky outside. Kara, in contrast, felt a calm clarity settle over her. This was what she had trained for. This was the moment she had imagined in countless scenarios, alone in her bedroom with a joystick and a screen. The moment that truly shifted the energy in the cabin was when the radio lit up. A crisp voice, military composed yet tinged with awe, called out, "Ice Hawk, status check." The words sliced through the tension like a laser. Ice Hawk. That was Kara's call sign, her identity in the most elite covert flight program the Air Force had ever secretly maintained. And the effect was instantaneous. The whispers ceased. The seasoned F-22 pilots snapped to attention, their casual skepticism replaced with rigid respect. They were not used to addressing anyone under 20 with the kind of authority and recognition that Ice Hawk commanded. And yet here she was, a girl barely out of high school, sitting calmly in seat 11F, and suddenly the dynamics of the room had shifted entirely. Captain Daniels' eyes narrowed, a mixture of disbelief and admiration crossing his face. "Is this for real?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He had flown alongside some of the best aviators in the world, men and women who had survived combat missions across multiple continents, and now they were faced with someone who had been erased from all conventional records. Kara felt the weight of their attention but refused to let it unsettle her. She straightened in her seat, adjusted her headset, and answered over the comm. "All systems checked, ready for insertion." Her voice was steady, controlled, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The pilots exchanged a look, unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. They had heard of Ice Hawk's simulations, the impossible maneuvers she had pulled off in secret programs. But no one had ever expected to see her here, in real time, under real operational conditions. The transport plane continued its climb, the desert lights below shrinking into an abstract blur. Kara's stomach twisted with the thrill and fear of what was to come. She could feel the tension in the cabin, the unspoken question: could a kid really fly with the best of the best? Could she survive a mission that had tested seasoned pilots to their limits? Kara's fingers flexed over the armrests. She didn't need validation from anyone, but she knew she was about to earn it in the most dangerous way imaginable. Then the intercom crackled once more. "Ice Hawk, final confirmation. Prepare for high-altitude jump. Your entry point is in T-minus 30 seconds. Kara took a deep breath, feeling the G-forces press her back against the seat. Outside, the clouds whipped past like streaks of silver and gray. She glanced at the pilots, each one watching her now, a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed awe in their eyes. The moment she had trained for her entire life had arrived. And then a sudden jolt rocked the plane, throwing passengers forward. A warning light blinked red on the control panel. The pilot's voice, tight with urgency, cut through the roar. "Hold on, something's not right with the hydraulics." Kara's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment where theory met reality, the moment that separated those who survived from those who didn't. And as the transport plane pitched violently, she realized that nothing could prepare her for what lay ahead, not even her secret training. She glanced down at her seat number, 11F, and then out the window at the darkening Nevada desert below. The moment of truth had arrived, and in a split second her call sign, Ice Hawk, would prove whether she was just a kid or the most formidable pilot the Air Force had ever seen. Her hand tightened on the armrest. The plane lurched again, and for a heartbeat the world held its breath. The transport plane leveled off, but the atmosphere inside was thick with disbelief. Kara Mitchell, Ice Hawk, sat in 11F, her body still trembling slightly from the violent takeoff, though her face remained composed. Around her, the seasoned F-22 pilots were uncharacteristically quiet, processing the fact that the small, unassuming girl in the back of the plane was someone they had only ever heard about in whispers. Her call sign wasn't just a name. It was a legend, a code that signified years of secret training, maneuvers perfected in simulators, and feats deemed impossible by anyone outside the clandestine program that had created her. Captain Daniels, normally stoic and unflappable, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Ice Hawk," he said almost reverently. His voice carried weight, the unspoken acknowledgement that Kara's presence had just upended every assumption he held about operational capability. He motioned to Lieutenant Harper. "Do you realize what this means?" Harper shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. The room was silent except for the low hum of the engines. Even the flight attendants, who had flown countless missions and drills, were visibly tense, unsure whether they were witnessing protocol or the breaking of every rule in military aviation. Kara's gaze swept the cabin. She caught the wary, questioning eyes of the other pilots, and she allowed herself the briefest flicker of amusement. Years of secrecy, of training in isolation had led to this moment. No one outside the classified program was supposed to know she existed, or if they did, They were not supposed to recognize her as anything more than a theoretical threat. Yet now, she was real, tangible, and sitting among the elite. The intercom crackled, snapping the pilot's attention back to operational reality. IceHawk, confirm systems. Prepare for mission insertion. All other aircraft, maintain formation and await her lead. The words weren't a test, they were a challenge. The mission was real, and the responsibility of leadership had just been thrust onto the shoulders of a 17-year-old. Kara's fingers flew over the controls, checking instrument panels, adjusting her seat harness, and confirming telemetry readings. Every motion was deliberate, precise, honed over countless simulations, each one more unforgiving than the last. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. The eyes of the best pilots in the Air Force were now trained on her every move, waiting to see if IceHawk could truly live up to her reputation. The murmurs started again, quieter this time but loaded with awe. "That's her. She really is IceHawk," one pilot whispered. "I thought it was a myth," another admitted, shaking his head. Kara felt their recognition as a tangible weight, but instead of pressure, it fueled her focus. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She just hadn't expected the audience to be so skeptical. Then came the first challenge. The pilot announced a simulated high-threat insertion zone over the Nevada desert, designed to mimic a hostile airspace scenario. F-22s would engage in maneuvers, evasions, and interception protocols, while the transport plane followed a precise flight path. Kara's mind raced through hundreds of possible outcomes in milliseconds. Every variable, the wind shear at high altitude, potential turbulence, reaction times of other aircraft, missile lock-on simulations, was calculated before her body even reacted. As the plane approached the designated zone, Captain Daniels leaned closer to Harper, his voice low but urgent. "She's not just a kid," he muttered. "She's someone we'd never expected to fly with real pilots. She's in a class by herself." Harper swallowed hard. The thought that a teenager, someone small enough to be mistaken for a civilian intern, could already be strategizing better than them in a real-world mission was almost incomprehensible. Kara didn't need their acknowledgement. She just needed the opportunity to act. The plane dipped slightly as it entered a pocket of turbulence, and she adjusted her harness without hesitation, keeping her eyes locked on the heads-up display. Her voice came over the comms, steady and commanding, issuing calculated instructions. "Lead aircraft, adjust altitude 500 feet. Wingman, maintain vector delta. Maintain speed 270 knots." The pilots glanced at one another, some astonished, others skeptical, but all obeyed. Then the radio crackled again. "IceHawk, priority target, unknown UAV entering engagement zone. Protocol engagement." Kara's mind raced. This was the first test that wasn't simulated in isolation. This was real-time, unpredictable, and potentially catastrophic if handled incorrectly. She took a deep breath and responded with calm authority. "Engage, but maintain evasive formation. I will coordinate intercept." The pilots exchanged shocked looks. She wasn't just giving orders, she was executing them flawlessly. Every directive she gave accounted for trajectory, altitude, wind conditions, and the limits of both the transport plane and the F-22s. It was a level of operational insight that many experienced pilots spent years developing. And yet here she was, a kid in seat 11F, orchestrating the mission like a seasoned commander. Captain Daniels leaned back, exhaling slowly, almost in disbelief. "I've seen a lot in my career," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "But I've never seen anyone like her." His hands tightened on the armrest as the transport plane made a smooth, precise correction, guided by Kara's adjustments. The tension in the cabin was electric. Pilots who had trained for decades, flown in combat scenarios around the world, and faced life-and-death situations, now looked to Kara as the linchpin of their mission. She caught glimpses of astonishment and respect reflected in their visors, their initial skepticism replaced by grudging admiration. And then over the intercom came the question that would define the next few moments. "IceHawk, do you copy? Are you ready for insertion?" Kara's heart pounded, but her voice betrayed nothing. She responded calmly, confidently, "Copy. All systems nominal, preparing for drop sequence." The pilot's eyes widened again. They weren't just observing a prodigy, they were witnessing the emergence of a legend in real time. And as the plane descended toward the high-altitude insertion point, Kara realized that this mission was no longer just a test of skill, it was a test of trust. Could they, the best pilots in the Air Force, trust a 17-year-old to lead them through the impossible? The wind outside howled against the fuselage as the plane hit the stratosphere, and Kara's gaze hardened. There was no turning back. Once the ramp opened, once the insertion began, every decision she made could mean survival or catastrophe. Her fingers tightened on the harness. The engines roared louder. And for the first time, the pilots weren't just watching a kid, they were watching Ice Hawk. The plane tilted, and a sudden jolt sent a ripple of panic through the cabin. Kara's eyes snapped to the instruments. A warning light flashed. Something wasn't right with the aft hydraulics. The pilot muttered under his breath, "Not now, please, not now." Kara's mind raced. The first real obstacle had appeared, and she knew instinctively that the pilots would be watching her response, analyzing every reaction. This was the moment to prove, definitively, that Ice Hawk was not just a name whispered in secrecy, but a force to be reckoned with. The plane shuddered violently again. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, black and infinite. Inside, Kara took a deep, centering breath, prepared to act. She wasn't just a kid in seat 11F anymore. She was the pilot the Air Force didn't know it needed. And as the intercom crackled again, this time with heightened urgency, Kara knew one thing with absolute certainty. The mission had only just begun, and nothing would ever be the same after this night. The transport plane's ramp groaned under pressure as it tilted slightly, the wind outside howling like a living thing. Kara Mitchell, in seat 11F, adjusted her harness and inhaled the thin, cold air of high-altitude flight. The Nevada desert far below looked unreal, a patchwork of shadows and glints of city lights. Every pilot in the cabin held their breath, watching her closely. Kara was small, almost fragile, but the aura she radiated was unmistakable. Ice Hawk was about to prove why her call sign commanded attention even from the best F-22 pilots in the world. The first maneuver wasn't optional. It was a test of instinct, precision, and nerve. The pilots could feel the tension building as the transport plane reached the designated drop zone. Kara's hands moved with deliberate speed, calibrating instruments, adjusting coordinates, and running mental calculations faster than most adults could follow. She had memorized every scenario, every contingency, every variable, but this was no simulator. The wind gusts, the plane's vibrations, the sheer altitude all demanded exact precision. One miscalculation and the entire mission could be compromised. Captain Daniels leaned forward, his voice tight over the comms. "Ice Hawk, confirm maneuver readiness." His tone carried equal parts skepticism and barely concealed anticipation. Kara didn't respond verbally at first. Instead, her eyes scanned the digital heads-up display, tracking the relative positions of the F-22s, the transport plane, and the open desert below. She could feel the energy in the cabin shifting. Even pilots who had faced life-and-death missions in combat zones were suddenly deferential, their confidence quietly surrendering to curiosity. Then she spoke. Her voice, calm and commanding, cut through the roar of the engines. "Initiating maneuver, maintain formation, follow my lead." The simplicity of the instruction belied the complexity of the action she had calculated in seconds. The F-22 pilots, for a fraction of a heartbeat, exchanged stunned glances. She wasn't just giving orders. She was orchestrating a symphony of precise, high-risk aerial maneuvers. The transport plane pitched, and Kara felt herself pressed into her seat as if gravity had doubled. The F-22s swooped alongside, executing rolls and coordinated dives that would have overwhelmed lesser pilots. Kara's eyes tracked every movement, her mind calculating vectors, wind shear, and acceleration in real time. Her fingers danced over the controls, issuing subtle adjustments to the plane's trajectory. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the pivot point around which the operation revolved. One pilot, Lieutenant Vega, whispered to a colleague, barely audibly over the engine roar. She's anticipating our moves. How is that even possible? Another pilot, more experienced, shook his head. I've been flying combat maneuvers for 15 years, never seen this. Never a kid, just a kid, is predicting adjustments I haven't even considered. Kara, of course, heard none of it. Her focus was absolute. Any distraction could prove fatal. And then the first real challenge emerged, a simulated drone streaking toward the formation at terrifying speed. The alert lights blinked red across the HUD. The pilot's voice cut through the intercom, tense and clipped. "Icehawk, threat detected. Engage protocol." Kara's mind processed the situation in milliseconds. She calculated approach angles, timing windows, and evasive patterns, all while accounting for the transport plane's limitations and the F-22's capabilities. Then, as if on instinct, she gave the order. "Wingman Alpha, intercept from 3 o'clock high. Wingman Bravo, cover Vector Delta. I will lead the engagement." Her tone left no room for doubt. The F-22 pilots executed her commands flawlessly, though some moved with visible hesitation. They were trained for teamwork and strategy, but never had they been guided by a 17-year-old who had never flown in real combat. And yet, every adjustment Kara made was precise. The drone zigzagged, tried to break formation, but the pilots followed her lead. In an instant, the machine faltered under the coordinated pressure. Then came the moment that truly stunned everyone. Kara executed a split-second barrel roll in the transport plane, not a standard procedure, but a maneuver she had practiced countless times in simulators. The plane swayed dangerously, the cabin lights flickering as the G-forces pressed against the pilots and aircrew. But Kara's movements were perfect. The drone, now within the targeting range of the F-22s, was neutralized in a controlled detonation above the desert. The cabin erupted in a mixture of relief and astonishment. Some of the pilots muttered expletives in disbelief. Others were silent, eyes wide, processing what they had just witnessed. Captain Daniels exhaled, gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. This is unreal," he muttered. His mind was racing. He had trained hundreds of pilots. He had seen men and women push the limits of aerial combat. And yet, Icehawk, this kid in 11F, had just outmaneuvered a coordinated threat with precision he hadn't thought possible. Kara, however, remained focused. The mission wasn't over. More challenges loomed, and she knew that one mistake now could unravel the delicate formation and endanger the base below. She tracked the radar meticulously, anticipating movement, calculating angles, and instructing the F-22s with a calm authority that belied her age. One of the senior pilots, Lieutenant Vega, finally spoke over the intercom, voice trembling slightly. "Icehawk, I don't even know what to say. How are you doing this?" Kara didn't answer verbally. Instead, she issued another set of precise instructions. "Formation tighten to Vector 6. Prepare for high-altitude evasive sequence. Trust my lead." For a moment, the pilots hesitated. The maneuver was risky, far beyond standard protocol, but the certainty in Kara's voice overrode their hesitation. They adjusted their positions, their confidence fragile but growing with every perfectly timed maneuver. The desert stretched below them, dark and endless, but above, the night sky opened into an arena of adrenaline, speed, and danger. Kara felt the thrill of mastery, an intoxicating combination of fear, focus, and exhilaration. Each maneuver, each split-second calculation, was a testament to years of clandestine training, of nights spent alone in simulators, learning the limits of aircraft, physics, and human reaction. And then the intercom crackled again, this time with an urgency that made every pilot's stomach twist. "Unknown high-speed contact detected. Approach vector unconfirmed. Icehawk, what's your assessment?" Kara's heart rate spiked. The real threat had just appeared. The F-22s tightened their formation, engines screaming, but they looked to her now for guidance. In that moment, Kara realized the full weight of her presence. She wasn't just a prodigy. She was the pivot on which the safety of every pilot in the sky, and potentially everyone on the ground, now rested. Her eyes narrowed on the radar. Her fingers moved over the controls with calculated precision. She had seconds to act, milliseconds to predict, and the fate of the operation depended entirely on her instincts. This was no longer a test. This was real, and Kara Mitchell Icehawk was ready. The transport plane dipped. The F-22s sliced through the clouds in perfect formation, and the desert night below stretched like an infinite challenge. Every pilot in the sky now understood the truth. The kid in seat 11F wasn't just capable, she was extraordinary. And yet the unknown contact on the radar moved faster than any of them expected, closing in on the formation. Kara's stomach tightened. This was only the beginning. The real test had arrived. The wind screamed. The engines roared. And Icehawk prepared to turn a calculated risk into a flawless maneuver, or face the consequences of failure in full view of the most elite pilots in the Air Force. The radar pinged repeatedly, a harsh, insistent warning echoing through the cockpit of the transport plane. Kara Mitchell, known in the airspace as Icehawk, tightened her grip on the controls, her jaw set. The F-22 pilots surrounding her exchanged glances that mixed disbelief and apprehension. A rogue drone, its size and speed defying any known training simulation, was streaking toward the formation, red lights blinking ominously on their HUDs. This wasn't part of the planned exercise. The tension in the cabin was palpable, every passenger sensing that the next seconds would define the night. "Icehawk, do you see that?" Captain Daniels barked over the intercom, his normally composed voice tight with urgency. Kara's eyes didn't leave the radar. The drone's trajectory was unpredictable, erratic, and aggressive. It wasn't following standard flight patterns. It was calculating, testing, probing. Her mind raced through scenarios, parsing the potential outcomes with the precision only a prodigy could manage. The F-22 pilots, who had trained for decades, were relying entirely on her instinctive leadership. "Wingman Alpha, intercept high," Kara instructed. Her tone was calm, almost soothing in contrast to the panic she felt creeping up her spine. "Wingman Bravo, cover Vector Delta. I'll lead the engagement. Adjust for turbulence at 30-degree ascent." The pilots executed her commands with hesitant precision, some casting incredulous glances at each other. They had never followed orders from someone so young, but the logic and clarity in her instructions left no room for argument. The drone closed in with terrifying speed, its sensors locking onto the transport plane. The warning sirens blared louder, the cabin vibrating with tension. Kara felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the sharp clarity that always came in moments of crisis. Her fingers moved instinctively, calculating trajectories, angles, wind speed, and reaction times. Every calculation had to be perfect. One misstep could mean disaster for the formation, and potentially for the base below. Then, just as the drone surged into engagement range, Kara initiated a maneuver that stunned everyone in the sky. She executed a sudden barrel roll in the transport plane, a maneuver so precise it left no margin for error. The G-forces pressed the pilots into their seats, some gritting their teeth against the strain. The F-22s followed her lead, adjusting their vectors to create a perfect intercept. The rogue drone flinched, its programmed trajectory disrupted by Kara's unexpected move. "Unbelievable," muttered Lieutenant Vega over the comms. "She's predicting the drone's moves before it even executes them." Captain Daniels' eyes widened. He had flown with elite pilots, trained in combat maneuvers that pushed human reflexes to the limit, and yet here was a teenager reading the battlefield with uncanny precision. The drone responded, changing tactics, but Kara anticipated it. She adjusted her plane's course, guiding the F-22s into a coordinated interception. The drone zigzagged and accelerated, but Icehawk had already calculated the exact vector required for neutralization. In a blink, the F-22s executed a perfect strike, sending the rogue drone spinning in a controlled detonation above the desert. Flames illuminated the night sky, reflecting in Kara's visor. For a heartbeat, the sky went silent. The pilots, their adrenaline still spiking, looked at Kara with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She exhaled slowly, focusing her mind. This was only the beginning. The real threat was still on the radar. A larger, faster, and far more dangerous blip had just appeared, moving directly toward the base. Kara's stomach tightened. This was no simulation. The stakes were real and lives hung in the balance. Unknown high-speed contact, approaching at 700 knots. Altitude 12,000 feet, reported the lead F-22 pilot. All units prepare for evasive maneuvers. Kara's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a standard intercept. This was an unknown aircraft. Its speed, agility, and trajectory defied conventional combat protocols. She had anticipated many challenges in her secret training, but nothing prepared her for this level of unpredictability. "Listen carefully," she said over the comms, her voice calm but commanding. "We will initiate high-altitude split formation. Wingman Alpha, position 2 o'clock high. Wingman Bravo, maintain vector delta. Transport plane, follow my lead precisely. Timing is critical." Her words carried the weight of authority that forced compliance. Even the most skeptical pilots fell in line, trusting the instincts of a girl who had been erased from every record, now commanding the skies like a seasoned veteran. The rogue aircraft shifted, banking violently as if testing the formation. Kara anticipated the maneuver before it happened, adjusting her plane's trajectory and instructing the F-22s in real time. The pilots executed her orders flawlessly, though the intensity of the moment was visible in their tense expressions. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the formation and casting shadows across the desert below. Kara's heart pounded, but her mind remained razor-sharp. And then the unthinkable happened. The rogue aircraft fired a simulated missile directly at the transport plane. The alarm blared, red lights flashing across the cockpit. Time seemed to slow. Kara's instincts kicked in. She calculated the perfect evasive arc, guiding the transport plane in a sudden dive while coordinating the F-22s to intercept. The missile detonated harmlessly in the distance, a fiery bloom against the night sky. Captain Daniels muttered under his breath, disbelief written across his face. "This kid, I've never," his words trailed off, swallowed by the roar of engines and the chaos outside. Kara didn't acknowledge the praise. She had no time for ego. Every second counted, every movement mattered. The unknown threat was still out there, unpredictable and lethal. The pilots followed her guidance, executing complex maneuvers with precision that defied the odds. Kara's calculations were flawless, her instincts honed to perfection. The transport plane weaved through turbulence, narrowly avoiding electrical storms and high-speed air pockets, while the F-22s flanked the rogue aircraft. Every maneuver was timed to the millisecond, every action synchronized like a deadly dance in the night sky. As the plane leveled, Kara's eyes flicked to the radar. The rogue aircraft was retreating, but its trajectory indicated it would regroup and return for another strike. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't over. The pilots, though awed by her skill, now understood the reality of the mission. Icehawk wasn't just a prodigy, she was the linchpin of survival. "Prepare for secondary engagement," Kara said, her voice calm but steel-edged. "We'll maintain formation and anticipate vectors. Trust the lead." The pilots nodded, some still shaking from adrenaline, all now fully aware that the smallest, youngest pilot among them had just saved the mission, and perhaps their lives. For a moment, the desert below stretched endlessly, silent and indifferent to the chaos above. Kara's heart raced, but she allowed herself a brief moment to center, to breathe. The first threat had been neutralized, but she knew the next challenge would come faster and fiercer. The night sky held more dangers than anyone could predict, and Icehawk was ready. The intercom crackled, urgent and clipped. "Icehawk, multiple contacts inbound. All units brace for evasive action." Kara's eyes hardened. This was the moment when training, instinct, and courage collided. The pilots, now fully aware of who she was, braced themselves. Icehawk wasn't just a kid. She was the force they hadn't seen coming. And as the unknown threat surged closer, the sky erupted into chaos, a ballet of speed, precision, and raw nerve, where every decision, every split-second maneuver could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Kara tightened her grip, set her jaw, and prepared for the next engagement. The night had only just begun. The radar screen blinked with an ominous cluster of blips. The rogue aircraft was no longer a single threat. It was moving with calculated intent, closing the distance with a speed that defied conventional logic. Kara Mitchell Icehawk adjusted her seat harness and tightened her grip on the controls, her mind firing in rapid sequences. She could feel the F-22 pilots tense behind her, waiting for guidance. Every second counted. One misstep, one incorrect maneuver could result in catastrophe for the transport plane and for the base below. Unknown contact confirmed. Hostile pilot. High-speed approach. Prepare for engagement, crackled the comms. Captain Daniels' voice was clipped, strained with urgency. The seasoned pilots had expected simulations, drills, perhaps even rogue drones, but nothing could have prepared them for the raw precision and audacity of a rogue human pilot closing in at 750 knots. Kara's pulse surged. She had trained for this, in simulators and secret programs, but nothing replicated the pressure of a real-life opponent who could think, anticipate, and adapt as she did. Wingman Alpha, Vector Delta, intercept on my mark. Wingman Bravo, cover high altitude, she instructed, voice steady, precise, commanding. The pilots executed her orders, their trust in her instincts solidifying with every perfectly timed maneuver. Kara calculated trajectories, wind vectors, speed adjustments, and evasive arcs, all within milliseconds. Her eyes darted between HUD readings and radar pings, every flicker of motion analyzed instantly. She wasn't just piloting. She was orchestrating a ballet of destruction, where precision and timing were the difference between success and failure. The rogue pilot adjusted course, banking violently, trying to throw the formation off. Kara anticipated the movement before it even completed. She guided the transport plane in a sharp dive, narrowly avoiding turbulence pockets and sudden updrafts, while simultaneously directing the F-22s in a coordinated interception. The enemy pilot tried again, accelerating toward the base, but Icehawk's split-second calculations left no gaps in their coverage. One of the pilots, Lieutenant Vega, muttered under his breath, disbelief and awe entwined in his tone. She's predicting his every move, it's like she can see the future. Captain Daniels, normally stoic and unshakable, tightened his jaw. I've flown combat missions across 3 continents, he admitted quietly. I've seen men die from mistakes smaller than what she just corrected, and she's 17. The veteran pilots were witnessing history, an anomaly in the sky that defied every rule they had learned and lived by. Then the rogue pilot fired. Missile locks lit up the HUD, alarms blaring violently through the cabin. The transport plane shuddered, the vibration of the engines intensified. Kara's heart hammered in her chest, but her mind remained calm. She calculated the evasive arc, a series of barrel rolls and sudden dives, guiding the F-22s to cover the vulnerable transport plane. The missile detonated harmlessly behind them, a burst of fire in the distance. But the rogue wasn't finished. Secondary engagement inbound, the comm warned. Pilot is altering trajectory heading for base coordinates. Estimated impact 2 minutes. Kara's stomach tightened. She didn't flinch. Years of clandestine training had prepared her for this exact scenario. High-speed pursuit, hostile pilot, zero margin for error. She issued orders with calm authority. Lead aircraft, maintain vector delta. Wingman Bravo, flank high. Transport plane, mimic my maneuvers exactly. Timing critical. The pilots obeyed without hesitation, the awe in their eyes replaced by focused determination. The chase escalated. The rogue pilot banked sharply, attempting a maneuver that would have left lesser pilots disoriented. Kara countered instinctively, guiding the formation through a sequence of evasive actions that were more than textbook. They were artistry in motion. The desert below blurred into streaks of shadow and light, lightning from distant storms flickering across the horizon. The F-22s and transport plane moved as one unit, coordinated by the precision of a mind that had trained in isolation for years. Suddenly, the rogue pilot gained a clear line of sight for another missile. Alarm screamed. Kara's eyes locked onto the HUD, calculating angles, speed, and timing. She executed a dive that seemed impossible, the transport plane dipping sharply while the F-22s flanked the rogue's path. The missile detonated midair, debris scattering into the night. Every pilot exhaled, but the threat remained, relentless, calculating, alive. Kara's mind raced ahead. She saw an opening, a tiny vector gap where the rogue pilot could be forced into a controlled intercept without risking the transport plane. She issued precise commands, her voice steady despite the intensity. Wingman Alpha, take intercept vector 3. Wingman Bravo, cover from below. Transport plane, maintain altitude 12,000 feet and follow my lead. Now. The pilots executed her instructions with flawless timing. The rogue pilot, misjudging the coordinated response, found himself cornered. His maneuvers became desperate, erratic, while Kara's plan unfolded with near perfection. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the drama. One small transport plane, flanked by F-22s, chasing a rogue jet with deadly intent. Captain Daniels watched wide-eyed. She's corralling him, he muttered. I've never seen this, never. Even the other pilots, seasoned veterans, were speechless. Kara's ability to anticipate, calculate, and lead was unlike anything they had encountered. The rogue pilot, realizing his advantage slipping away, attempted a last-ditch maneuver, banking sharply toward the desert floor. Kara anticipated the move, her instructions over comms synchronized with the F-22's reactions. The rogue jet clipped the edge of the formation, and one final evasive maneuver by Icehawk forced the enemy off course. The F-22s engaged, a controlled intercept that sent the rogue spiraling away, unable to maintain altitude or trajectory. For a moment, silence dominated the formation. The desert below stretched like an endless void, the wind screaming past the fuselage. Kara's heart pounded, but she remained calm, surveying her HUD, every system nominal. The rogue was neutralized for now. Lieutenant Vega finally spoke, voice shaky with awe. She just did how is that even possible? Captain Daniels exhaled, leaning back in disbelief. We just witnessed history. A 17-year-old just outmaneuvered a trained, hostile pilot and kept everyone alive. His gaze flicked to Kara, who sat quietly in 11F, seemingly unaffected by the adrenaline storm around her. But Kara knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The rogue pilot had been a test, a probe, but more threats were possible. Every movement in the sky could carry danger, and she would have to stay several steps ahead to protect her team and the base below. Her eyes flicked to the radar again, scanning for anomalies, plotting vectors, preparing for the inevitable next engagement. The F-22 pilots, though shaken, now followed her with unquestioned trust. Icehawk wasn't just a prodigy. They understood that she was a force of nature, a mind that could anticipate threats beyond their comprehension. And as the desert night stretched endlessly beneath them, Kara realized that the chase was far from over. The next move could decide everything. Her hands tightened on the controls. The engines roared, the F-22s flanked the transport plane, and the night sky became a theater of raw nerve, precision, and split-second decisions. Icehawk was in command, and the enemy didn't know what was coming next. The radar blip was no longer just a distant threat. It had closed in. The rogue pilot, aggressive and unpredictable, streaked toward the transport plane with frightening speed, weaving through the clouds like a phantom. Kara Mitchell Icehawk leaned forward, her eyes locked on the HUD, her fingers moving in a blur across the controls. Every muscle in her body was coiled, every thought razor-sharp. She wasn't just flying. She was calculating survival, strategy, and precision in real time. Failure was unthinkable. Captain Daniels, normally calm and collected, muttered under his breath, his eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. She's actually going to take him head-on, he said, disbelief tinged with awe. Every pilot in the cabin knew the stakes. This was no simulation. This was life and death at 12,000 feet, and Icehawk was the linchpin between disaster and survival. All units brace for direct engagement, Kara's voice cut over the comms, calm yet commanding. Wingman Alpha take high intercept. Wingman Bravo cover rear vector. Transport plane maintain course, trust my lead. Her tone left no room for doubt. The F-22 pilots, seasoned warriors who had faced real combat scenarios, executed her commands flawlessly. Even in the midst of chaos, Kara's authority was absolute. The rogue pilot adjusted course, banking violently, trying to split the formation. Kara anticipated the movement instantly, her mind calculating vectors, speed, and wind resistance in milliseconds. She executed a sharp dive with the transport plane, threading it between turbulent updrafts and lightning-lit clouds. The F-22s responded, cutting through the night sky like predatory falcons, perfectly synchronized to her lead. "Unbelievable," Lieutenant Vega muttered under his breath, clutching his harness as the G-forces pressed against his body. "She's predicting his moves before he even makes them." Captain Daniels exhaled sharply. "I've flown with the best of the best, never seen anything like this." Kara didn't acknowledge their praise. Her focus was absolute. Every flicker of movement on the HUD, every nuance in the rogue pilot's flight pattern, demanded immediate reaction. Then with a sudden jolt, the rogue fired. Missiles locked onto the transport plane, alarms blaring violently through the cabin. Kara's heart surged, but her mind was a calm storm. She had trained for this in countless simulations and isolated drills, but now the reality was harsher, the stakes exponentially higher. She executed a split-second evasive maneuver, banking sharply while guiding the F-22s into protective arcs. The missiles detonated harmlessly behind them, fiery blossoms illuminating the night sky. The rogue pilot wasn't finished. He was skilled, adaptive, relentless. He veered aggressively, attempting to force a collision, but Kara anticipated the trajectory. Her fingers danced over the controls, issuing commands to the F-22s in a rhythm so precise it was almost surgical. Wingman Alpha sliced through the clouds to block the rogue's path, while Wingman Bravo flanked him from behind, creating a pincer that left no escape. "Hold tight," Kara shouted over the comms, though her voice betrayed no fear. The transport plane tilted, the cabin lights flickering under the strain, yet every pilot followed her lead. The rogue tried to dodge, banking sharply toward the desert below, but Kara anticipated the ground effect, the turbulence, the exact moment he would overextend. In a move both daring and calculated, she led the F-22s into a perfect intercept formation. Captain Daniels' eyes widened. She's corralling him. She's actually controlling the fight." The veteran pilots could barely process what they were seeing. Kara, a 17-year-old girl in Seat 11F, had transformed from a prodigy into a tactical force. Every maneuver was flawless, every prediction precise. The rogue's advantage was collapsing under the weight of her instinct and calculation. The rogue pilot, desperate and cornered, tried a last-ditch maneuver, a sudden barrel roll aiming directly at the transport plane. The alarms blared louder, the HUD flashing warnings in bright red. Kara's eyes narrowed. She executed a countermove instantly, adjusting the plane's altitude and issuing commands to the F-22s. "Evasive high vector now. Alpha intercept at 3 o'clock, Bravo cover low. I'll guide transport, stay tight." The transport plane shuddered violently under the G-forces, but Kara's maneuvers were precise. The rogue's trajectory was disrupted, the barrel roll neutralized, and the F-22s flanked him perfectly. In one fluid motion, Icehawk guided the rogue into a controlled intercept, forcing him into a spin that left him disoriented and off course. The pilots in the formation stared in stunned silence. She's controlling him from a transport plane," whispered Lieutenant Vega. Captain Daniels' jaw dropped. "I've faced pilots in combat, men and women with decades of experience, and she's outmaneuvering them. She's extraordinary." Kara didn't smile. She couldn't afford to. The rogue was still in the sky, dangerous and unpredictable, and every second mattered. The rogue tried one final acceleration, shooting toward the base coordinates. Kara's mind raced. She calculated speed, wind, trajectory, and timing. Then, with flawless precision, she guided the transport plane into a sudden dive, drawing the rogue off the intended path while directing the F-22s to cut him off. The enemy pilot spiraled, forced into a defensive maneuver he couldn't maintain. Kara's heartbeat remained steady, though adrenaline surged through her veins. She had done the impossible. She had anticipated, predicted, and neutralized the rogue pilot's attacks, using strategy, instinct, and sheer calculation. The formation stabilized, the engines of the transport plane humming with controlled fury, and the desert night stretched below them, calm once more. The intercom crackled. "Icehawk status report," Captain Daniels said, his voice tinged with awe. Kara's eyes scanned the HUD. Systems were nominal. The rogue pilot was disabled, forced to retreat. She exhaled slowly. "All systems stable, threat neutralized, formation secure, continue to extraction point." Her tone was calm, but the weight of what had just occurred pressed on everyone. For the first time, the F-22 pilots allowed themselves a moment of relief. They had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, yet a girl in 11F had guided them flawlessly through the chaos. Icehawk wasn't just a prodigy. She was a leader, a strategist, and a force that had earned their unwavering trust in minutes. Captain Daniels finally spoke aloud, his voice steady but filled with admiration. "I've flown with the best of the best, faced scenarios most people couldn't even imagine, and I've never seen anything like that. Icehawk, you just saved all of us." Kara nodded briefly, her focus unbroken. There was no time for praise. The mission wasn't over. She scanned the horizon, aware that the desert night held more threats, more challenges. The rogue pilot may have been neutralized for now, but Kara knew this was only the beginning. The sky was unpredictable, the stakes were high, and she was the only one capable of navigating the danger ahead. Her fingers flexed on the controls, her mind calculating the next sequence of maneuvers. The F-22s flanked her protectively, but all eyes remained on her. Icehawk was no longer just a call sign. She was the pivot on which the mission and everyone's survival rested. The wind howled past the fuselage, the engines roared in unison, and the desert stretched endlessly below. Kara's gaze hardened. She was ready for whatever came next. The night was far from over, and the true test of Icehawk's skill, courage, and leadership was about to reach its climax. The desert night stretched endlessly, but Kara Mitchell, Icehawk, could feel every heartbeat of the mission. The rogue pilot had been neutralized, but intelligence reports had just pinged new coordinates, an unexpected cluster of high-speed drones approaching the base from multiple vectors. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a test scenario. It was a live, coordinated assault, faster and more unpredictable than anything she had faced. Her fingers tightened on the controls, mind calculating trajectories, speeds, and potential risks in milliseconds. Every second counted. Hesitation could mean disaster. Captain Daniels and the F-22 pilots flanked the transport plane, their trust in Icehawk absolute but their tension palpable. Even seasoned warriors felt the weight of the night pressing down on them. "Icehawk," Daniels said, voice tight with urgency, "we've got multiple hostiles inbound. Estimated time to impact, 90 seconds. What's your plan?" Kara's eyes scanned the HUD, radar, and tactical displays. She inhaled, centering herself. There was no margin for error. "Form split formation. Alpha intercept high vector. Bravo cover low. Transport plane follow my lead precisely. Timing is everything, trust me." The pilots obeyed instantly. Their movements were fluid, synchronized, and deadly precise, guided by the instincts of a 17-year-old who had trained her entire life for moments like this. Kara's mind raced through dozens of potential outcomes. The drone's speed was staggering, their approach vectors unpredictable. Standard intercepts would fail. She needed to innovate fast. "Evasive maneuvers, Delta Arc now," Kara instructed. The transport plane dipped sharply, the cabin lights flickering under the strain. The F-22 split, weaving through the night sky in a coordinated pattern designed to draw the drones into predictable paths. Kara anticipated their responses before they even reacted, recalculating trajectories in real time. The drones, fast and aggressive, began adjusting to her maneuvers, but she was already 2 steps ahead. Lieutenant Vega, gripping his harness, muttered under his breath, disbelief in his voice. She's controlling this entire engagement like a chess master. Captain Daniels, eyes locked on the horizon, exhaled sharply. I've trained for years, faced threats I never imagined, and she's orchestrating this entire sky assault. Kara didn't respond. There was no time. Every moment of hesitation could cost lives. The first wave of drones closed in. Kara guided the transport plane into a steep dive, simultaneously directing the F-22s into a synchronized intercept formation. The drones split, attempting to flank the formation, but Kara anticipated their angles perfectly. She issued split-second commands. Alpha intercept 3 o'clock high. Bravo flank 6 o'clock low. Transport plane maintain vector delta, adjust for wind shear. The F-22s responded flawlessly, closing in on the drones with lethal precision. Missiles streaked through the night, detonations lighting up the desert in bursts of fire and sparks. The transport plane shuddered under turbulence, but Kara's maneuvers were flawless. She had trained for this intensity, these high-speed, high-stakes scenarios, but now the stakes were real. She felt the pressure in every nerve, the responsibility of every life in the sky pressing down on her. And yet she thrived. Icehawk had never been more focused, more alive. Suddenly, the lead drone broke formation and accelerated toward the transport plane directly. The warning alarms blared violently, red lights flashing across the cockpit. Kara's mind calculated angles, speed, and timing in milliseconds. Transport plane, dive 15 degrees now. Wingman Alpha, intercept lead drone. Wingman Bravo, cover rear vector. The F-22s executed her commands with razor-sharp precision. The drone fired, but Kara had already predicted the trajectory. The missile detonated harmlessly behind them. The next wave was coming faster, 5 drones approaching from staggered vectors. Kara's pulse quickened. She couldn't allow even one to reach the base. Every movement had to be perfect. She adjusted the transport plane's flight path, banking sharply while the F-22 split into lethal, synchronized patterns. Her voice over the comms remained calm and commanding, guiding her team like a seasoned leader. Formation tight. Split vector Alpha. Delta arc now. Timing critical. The drones surged, attempting evasive maneuvers, but Kara's anticipation was flawless. Each intercept, each calculation, neutralized threats with surgical precision. The sky above the desert became a deadly ballet of speed, light, and controlled explosions. The F-22 pilots moved as extensions of her mind, trusting her instincts without question. Captain Daniels felt the weight of awe in the pit of his stomach. They were witnessing a living legend. But the ultimate test was still coming. The last drone, larger, faster, and more lethal than the rest, approached from behind, cloaked in shadow, its trajectory almost impossible to intercept. Kara's eyes narrowed. She had anticipated nearly every contingency, but this one required absolute daring. Wingman Alpha, cover high. Wingman Bravo, flank low. Transport plane, follow my lead into split delta maneuver. I'll intercept the lead drone directly. Her words left no room for hesitation. The transport plane dove toward the approaching drone, engines screaming. Kara executed a maneuver so precise it left the F-22 pilots momentarily stunned. A controlled barrel roll, banking the plane perfectly while the drone accelerated toward her. The lead drone fired, targeting the plane directly. Kara's mind predicted its movement before it occurred. She countered instantly, dodging the fire while simultaneously guiding the F-22s into a lethal intercept. The drone spiraled, forced into an evasive loop by Kara's calculated moves. Wingman Alpha and Bravo moved in tandem, striking with precision. The final missile hit the drone's engine, sending it spinning into the desert night below in a controlled detonation. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of engines and the wind rushing past the fuselage. Kara exhaled slowly, scanning the HUD. Systems nominal. All threats neutralized. Lieutenant Vega let out a shaky laugh, disbelief in his voice. She just did it every single one. Captain Daniels leaned back, jaw slack, heart still racing. I've faced life-or-death scenarios, fought in combat, and trained with the elite, and I've never seen anything like that. Ice Hawk, you're incredible." Kara, seated quietly in 11F, allowed herself a brief smile, but she knew the mission wasn't over. The base was safe for now, but vigilance was essential. The pilots, still catching their breath, now regarded her with complete trust and respect. Ice Hawk wasn't just a prodigy. They understood she was the linchpin of survival, the strategist who could anticipate threats beyond human comprehension. And as the desert night stretched endlessly beneath them, Kara knew that her place among these elite pilots had been solidified, not by age, not by appearance, but by skill, courage, and unwavering precision. The transport plane leveled off, the F-22s forming a protective perimeter. The wind howled, the engines hummed, and the desert below seemed to stretch forever. Kara's eyes scanned the horizon, ever vigilant, ready for any unexpected threat. She had faced the ultimate test in the sky, neutralized every threat, and led the elite pilots to victory. Yet she felt no triumph, only awareness that the mission's stakes were unrelenting. Captain Daniels finally broke the silence. "Ice Hawk, the Air Force doesn't train minds like yours, they hide them, but tonight, you proved why secrecy is necessary and why legends are real." Kara nodded silently. There was no room for celebration. She had earned their trust, demonstrated her skill, and survived the ultimate challenge. But the night had reminded her of one immutable truth. In the sky, nothing is predictable, and a true pilot must always be ready. The desert below stretched like a shadowed canvas. The engines hummed with controlled power. And Ice Hawk, the girl in seat 11F, knew that she had survived the ultimate test. But the story of her legend was only beginning. The first rays of dawn streaked across the Nevada desert, painting the sand in hues of gold and crimson. The adrenaline from the night still hummed through the transport plane's cabin, but Kara Mitchell, Ice Hawk, remained calm, her eyes scanning the horizon even as exhaustion tugged at her limbs. The rogue pilot was gone. The drones were neutralized. The F-22 formation had safely escorted the transport plane back toward base, but Kara knew that the mission's gravity extended far beyond what anyone could see. Lives had been protected tonight because of her precision, instinct, and courage. Captain Daniels exhaled, leaning back in his seat, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Ice Hawk, I don't think anyone in my career has seen anything like that. You led us through a storm no one should survive and came out flawless." His words, though meant to commend her, only briefly grazed Kara's consciousness. She was already reviewing her performance, replaying maneuvers in her mind, considering minor adjustments. Excellence was instinct, and she couldn't allow herself pride, not when unpredictability was always just one heartbeat away. Lieutenant Vega, seated nearby, could barely contain his admiration. 17 years old, and she just coordinated a full-scale aerial engagement. I don't even know how to describe it. It's unreal." The other pilots nodded silently, their respect for Kara evident in every glance. They had trained with the most elite forces, faced danger in every corner of the globe, and yet this kid in seat 11F had demonstrated something none of them had ever witnessed, a combination of instinct, strategy, and fearlessness that was almost otherworldly. Kara, however, remained silent, focusing instead on the instruments, the fading radar blips, and the distant lights of the base approaching beneath them. The weight of the night was settling in mentally, physically, emotionally. Even as a prodigy, she was human. She felt exhaustion in her bones, adrenaline fatting, and yet her mind was still alive, still calculating, still anticipating. Ice Hawk's legend wasn't just her skill. It was the relentless drive to stay ahead, to survive, and to protect. The transport plane touched down on the tarmac, engines roaring and brakes screeching against the concrete. The F-22s peeled off, their sleek silhouettes fading into the morning sky, leaving the transport plane alone to taxi toward the hangar. Kara's eyes flicked to the base personnel awaiting them. They had no idea what had unfolded above, no clue of the precision, courage, and near-superhuman anticipation that had saved the mission. The world would never know how close disaster had come, and how close she had pulled everyone back from the edge. As the cabin doors opened, Kara was greeted with a mixture of awe and confusion from the base staff. Officers and technicians rushed to debrief her, but none could fully articulate the reality of what had occurred. Captain Daniels finally stepped forward, his voice measured but reverent. "Kara, the way you led tonight, it's unprecedented. You've redefined what's possible in aerial engagement. Every pilot I've spoken to is still in shock. You're extraordinary." Kara simply nodded, allowing herself a small, fleeting smile. She had no need for accolades. The real satisfaction lay in knowing she had succeeded where failure could have meant catastrophe. But even as the initial euphoria and awe settled, the true revelation of Kara's identity was about to emerge. One of the F-22 pilots, a senior officer named Major Reynolds, approached her quietly. He glanced at her with a mixture of recognition and disbelief, his eyes narrowing. "Ice Hawk," he said softly, almost reverently, "your call sign, it can't be. It's you." Kara's heart skipped a beat, not because she was surprised, but because the secrecy of her identity had just been cracked. She had trained in shadows, hidden her age, and erased her presence from official records. Yet now, the legend and the girl were colliding. Major Reynolds continued, voice hushed. "We thought Ice Hawk was a classified program, a myth, a story to inspire new recruits, but you're real, and you just led the most elite pilots in the Air Force through a live, impossible engagement and survived." Kara's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. The weight of years of hidden training pressed on her. She nodded. "I am Ice Hawk. I've trained for this my entire life. I wasn't just ready, I had to be." The base erupted into a controlled frenzy. Officers, pilots, and personnel sought debriefs, statements, and explanations. Kara moved through it all with quiet authority, issuing instructions where necessary, clarifying details, and ensuring that the mission's outcome was recorded accurately. Every action was precise, efficient, and commanding, just as she had demonstrated in the skis hours before. Even the veteran F-22 pilots deferred to her expertise now. She wasn't a kid anymore. Not in the eyes of anyone who had witnessed her skill tonight. Yet the emotional weight lingered. Kara's mind replayed every second of the engagement, the rogue pilot, the drones, the missiles, the split-second decisions, and the lives she had been responsible for protecting. The exhilaration of success was tempered by exhaustion and awareness of the stakes. She had won the mission, but she had paid a price in sheer focus, in mental strain, in the burden of leadership that had been thrust upon her shoulders without warning. Captain Daniels approached her again, his expression softened with admiration. "Kara, you've earned every respect anyone could offer and more. You've done something most adults wouldn't even dream possible, but how did you keep your composure through it all?" Kara's gaze flickered to the distant horizon, the desert sun climbing steadily. "Focus," she said simply. "Training, and knowing that hesitation isn't an option. When you're responsible for lives, you don't think about fear, you think about solutions." The F-22 pilots, some still shaken, gathered around her. They were no longer skeptical, no longer questioning her abilities. They had witnessed her command the skis, predict the impossible, and emerge victorious. Ice Hawk was no longer a myth, no longer a shadowy figure hidden in legends. She was real, undeniable, and extraordinary. As the debriefings concluded, Kara finally allowed herself a moment of quiet. The adrenaline ebbed. The world outside the transport plane was calm, indifferent, and unaware of the chaos that had unfolded above. She took a deep breath, savoring the fleeting peace before the inevitable return to routine, training, and secrecy. She had survived the ultimate test. She had led, protected, and triumphed. And yet, a small, knowing smile crept across her face. The legend of Ice Hawk was only beginning. The Air Force had witnessed a glimpse of what she was capable of, but the true story of Kara Mitchell, the girl in seat 11F who could command the skis, predict the unpredictable, and turn impossible odds into victory, would remain hidden for now. The desert stretched endlessly, golden light spilling across the sand. Kara stood at the edge of the hangar, watching the horizon. She was young, small, and underestimated, but in the sky she was untouchable. Ice Hawk had survived the night, led the elite, and secured her place in history. The secret was out among those who mattered, the legend cemented, and yet the world remained oblivious. The winds whispered through the hangar, the engines cooled, and the desert held its quiet vigil. Kara's call sign had commanded respect from the most elite pilots in the Air Force, and as she walked toward the awaiting vehicle to leave the base, she knew the truth. The skis were hers, the legend hers, and the night had only solidified what everyone who had flown with her now understood. Icehawk was extraordinary. But somewhere deep in the desert horizon, a new blip flickered faintly on the radar. Kara's eyes narrowed. The mission may have ended, but the challenges of the sky never truly ceased. Icehawk was ready.